Hey there, wonderful viewers. If you're enjoying my content, please take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the YouTube algorithm show my videos to more people. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Now grab your favorite drink, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. I promise it'll be worth your time. Way back in 2013, when life felt more straightforward, my friends Thomas and Wesley decided we needed a proper adventure. Something beyond our usual weekend camping trips at local lakes. We were all approaching 30, drifting apart as careers and relationships pulled us in different directions. This trip was meant to reignite our bond, to give us something we'd remember forever. What about the Pacific Crest Trail? Thomas suggested during one of our planning sessions. Not the whole thing, just a section. A proper hike, not car camping. We settled on a challenging but manageable 70-mile stretch from Echo Lake near South Lake Tahoe to Donner Pass. The route would take us through Desolation Wilderness, which required permits, but those were easily arranged. 5 days of hiking and camping with no resupply meant we could avoid civilization completely, just us against nature. "You guys are insane," my sister told me when I shared our plans. "That's not a vacation. That's voluntary suffering." But as the departure date approached in late winter of 2013, anticipation built like electricity. The weather forecast promised clear skies and trail conditions were reported as excellent. Everything aligned perfectly. The night before we left, I laid out my gear on the living room floor. Lightweight tent, thermal sleeping bag, water filtration system, first aid kit, trekking poles, and layers of moisture-wicking clothing. My pack weighed just under 40 pounds with food and water, heavy enough to feel substantial, but not so heavy it would break me. That night, I slept fitfully, my mind racing with expectations. Would we make our daily mileage goals? Had I packed enough food? What if one of us got injured? But beneath those anxieties lay a deep current of excitement. Few things in life remained uncharted territory. But for 5 days we would step away from phones, emails, and obligations, free in ways modern life rarely allows. Morning came quickly. Wesley picked me up before dawn, Thomas already in the passenger seat nursing a travel mug of coffee. The drive to Echo Lake took several hours, during which we reviewed our route one final time and checked weather reports. Everything looked perfect. When we finally arrived at the trailhead, the morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lake. The granite peaks surrounding us reflected on the water's surface, creating mirror images that trembled with each passing breeze. We double-checked our packs, adjusted our straps, and took one last group photo before stepping onto the trail. "This is it," Thomas said, slinging his pack over his shoulders. "No turning back now." I remember feeling the weight of my pack settle against my spine as I took those first steps. The trail immediately began to climb, winding through alpine terrain dotted with twisted pines and exposed rock faces. The air felt thin and clean, filling my lungs with each breath. That first day we covered about 10 miles, moving steadily through breathtaking vistas until we reached Aloha Lake. The crystal-clear water stretched before us, surrounded by dramatic granite peaks that seemed almost artificially arranged in their perfection. Finding a suitable campsite took little time, a flat area with good drainage, close enough to water for convenience but far enough away to minimize our impact. As dusk approached, we gathered wood for a small fire and prepared our freeze-dried meals. Sitting around the flickering flames that night, watching stars emerge in unprecedented numbers above us, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The decision to undertake this journey already seemed validated. "I can't believe it took us this long to do something like this," Wesley said, echoing my thoughts as he poked at the embers with a stick. "Won't be the last time either," Thomas added. "This is just the beginning." None of us could have predicted how prophetic and terrifying those words would prove to be. Dawn broke with ethereal beauty, sunlight filtering through morning mist that hovered above Aloha Lake. We ate quickly, instant oatmeal and coffee before breaking camp. Our muscles ached in protest after the previous day's exertion, but we knew the second day would test us even more severely. 13 miles lay ahead, including the ascent of Dick's Pass, the highest point of our trek at nearly 10,000 feet. We set out early, wanting to clear the pass before afternoon when weather could turn unpredictable. The initial miles proved moderate, with gradual climbs through meadows still damp with morning dew. Wildflowers dotted the landscape despite the season, adding splashes of color against the predominantly green and gray backdrop. We maintained a steady pace, stopping only for water and brief rest periods. Around mid-morning, the serious climbing began. The trail narrowed and steepened dramatically, zigzagging up the mountain face in tight switchbacks. Each turn revealed another stretch ascending further upward, prompting good-natured groans from our group. "Remember when we thought this would be fun?" Wesley gasped, pausing to catch his breath. "Still is," Thomas replied, though his red face and labored breathing suggested otherwise. I lagged slightly behind them, my breath forming small clouds in the cool air. The weight of my pack seemed to double with each step upward, the straps digging into my shoulders despite careful adjustment. But something propelled me forward. Perhaps pride, perhaps determination not to be the one who slowed us down. As we climbed higher, the vegetation thinned, giving way to exposed, rocky terrain. The views expanded exponentially, revealing stunning panoramas of alpine lakes nestled among granite formations. Below us, Aloha Lake looked like a sapphire dropped onto stone. "Almost there," Thomas called back, having pulled ahead to scout our progress. The final approach to Dick's Pass proved the most challenging, steep, with loose rock underfoot demanding careful placement of each step. By the time we reached the summit, all three of us were drenched in sweat despite the cool temperature. But the view, standing atop that pass, gazing out across countless miles of wilderness, induced a feeling almost religious in its intensity. Mountain ranges extended to the horizon in all directions, their peaks catching sunlight and casting long shadows across valleys. Lakes dotted the landscape like scattered mirrors reflecting the cloudless blue sky. "Worth every step," Wesley said quietly, and neither Thomas nor I felt the need to respond. Some moments transcend words. We lingered there longer than our schedule allowed, reluctant to leave this pinnacle. Eventually, the cooling wind and advancing hours forced us to continue. The descent proved almost as challenging as the climb, but in different ways, the strain now focusing on knees and ankles rather than lungs and thighs. By mid-afternoon, we reached Middle Velma Lake, our destination for the night. Exhaustion radiated through every muscle, but satisfaction outweighed discomfort. We found a perfect campsite near the water's edge, protected by a cluster of pines that would provide both shade and windbreak. Setting up camp went quicker the second night, our actions becoming more coordinated with practice. After filtering water and preparing another freeze-dried dinner, we gathered around our small fire as twilight descended. "To Dick's Pass," Thomas proposed a toast with his water bottle. "To Dick's Pass," Wesley and I echoed, laughing despite our fatigue. That night I slept deeply and dreamlessly, lulled by the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore and the occasional distant call of an owl. None of us stirred until first light brightened the walls of our tents. Our third day promised more moderate terrain, a welcome respite after conquering Dick's Pass. We packed efficiently, now falling into a comfortable routine, and hit the trail by 7. The path meandered through dense forest and open meadows, crossing occasional streams where we paused to refill our water bottles. The filtered sunlight created dappled patterns on the ground, and the rich scent of pine permeated everything. No day could have contrasted more sharply with the previous one's exertion and exposure. "This is more like it," Wesley commented, as we strolled through a particularly beautiful meadow filled with wildflowers. "Almost feels like cheating after yesterday." "Don't get too comfortable," Thomas warned. "We still have 10 miles to cover today." But the miles passed easily, our bodies finding a sustainable rhythm that allowed conversation to flow naturally. We reminisced about past adventures, debated the merits of various hiking gear, and speculated about future trips. The day possessed a meditative quality, each step bringing us deeper into a mindful state rarely achieved in everyday life. Around midday, we encountered the first other hikers we'd seen since starting our journey, an older couple heading in the opposite direction. They reported good conditions ahead and mentioned spotting a black bear near Richardson Lake, our destination for the night. "Keep your food secured," the man advised. "That bear knows hikers carry easy meals." We thanked them for the warning and continued on, more alert now to our surroundings. Though bears rarely posed serious threats to humans, encountering one unprepared could prove problematic. We carefully reviewed our bear safety procedures as we walked. By mid-afternoon, we reached Richardson Lake earlier than expected. The additional time allowed us to scout the perfect campsite, a flat area on slightly elevated ground with a magnificent view of the water. The lake itself stretched before us, its surface rippling with occasional breezes, surrounded by thick forest and scattered granite outcroppings. Bear or no bear, this place is paradise, I remarked as we set up our tents. After establishing camp, we explored the lake's perimeter, watching trout rise to catch insects near the surface. Wesley, an avid fisherman, lamented not bringing tackle, while Thomas collected interesting rocks to examine, a geologist's habit he could never suppress. As evening approached, we prepared our meal with extra attention to cleanliness, mindful of the reported bear. All food items and scented products went into our bear canister, which we placed well away from our sleeping area before settling around our small campfire. Thomas produced a small metal flask from his pack. Special occasion supplies, he announced, unscrewing the cap and offering it around. The bourbon burned pleasantly going down, spreading warmth through my chest. We passed the flask back and forth as darkness enveloped the lake. Stars emerged in impossible numbers, their reflections dancing on the water's surface. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering orange light across our faces. These were moments of pure contentment, rare, precious, and impossible to manufacture. Do you ever wonder who else has sat exactly where we're sitting? Wesley asked after a comfortable silence. Like 100 years ago, maybe even 1,000? The question hung in the air, pregnant with implications about time and human transience. Native tribes definitely camped here, Thomas replied. Probably for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. And miners during the gold rush, I added. Plus all the PCT hikers who've passed through. That's what I love about places like this, Wesley continued. We're just temporary visitors in something much older and more permanent than ourselves. As the fire burned down to embers, our conversation drifted into philosophical territory, the kind of deep, unhurried discussion that only seems possible in wilderness settings. Eventually, the dropping temperature and our accumulated fatigue drove us to our tents. I fell asleep almost immediately, the gentle sounds of the forest serving as nature's lullaby. No dreams disturbed my rest that night, only the most profound, rejuvenating sleep I'd experienced in years. Morning brought clear skies again, though clouds gathering on the distant horizon suggested potential weather changes. We broke camp efficiently, our movements now synchronized through repetition, and hit the trail after a quick breakfast. Day 4's route would take us 13 miles to Barker Pass, including several miles along exposed ridgelines high above Lake Tahoe. The elevation profile showed considerable up and down rather than sustained, climbing a different kind of challenge. The initial miles took us through more forested terrain, gradually climbing toward the ridges that would dominate the day's journey. Pine needles cushioned our footsteps, and occasional breaks in the canopy offered tantalizing glimpses of the expanding views to come. By mid-morning, we emerged from the forest onto the first of several ridgelines. Lake Tahoe stretched before us, an impossible expanse of deep blue water surrounded by mountains. The scale defied comprehension, the lake so vast it resembled an inland sea rather than a mountain reservoir. No photograph could ever do this justice, Thomas remarked, shaking his head in wonder. The trail now clung to the mountainside, sometimes widening comfortably, other times narrowing alarmingly. In places, the drop-off to our right plunged hundreds of feet with no barrier beyond the trail's edge. My fear of heights, manageable in most situations, flared into acute anxiety. You doing okay? Wesley asked, noticing my tense posture and deliberate focus on the trail directly ahead. Just keeping my eyes on the path, I replied, breathing deliberately to calm my racing heart. The worst sections involved rounding outcroppings where the trail narrowed to barely 3 feet wide, with nothing but empty air beyond. During these passages, I pressed my body against the mountain face, moving with exaggerated caution while sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool temperature. Thomas and Wesley, neither troubled by heights, maintained a steady pace ahead of me, They waited patiently at particularly challenging sections, offering encouragement without pressure. "Take your time," Thomas called back at one point. "We're not in a race." But even through my fear, I couldn't help marveling at the spectacular views. Far below, Lake Tahoe's waters displayed variations of blue I'd never imagined. Deep navy near the center, transitioning to turquoise along shorelines. Boats created tiny white wakes on the surface, while distant highways looked like delicate threads woven across the landscape. By early afternoon, the trail mercifully began descending toward Barker Pass. As the path widened and the terrain grew less exposed, my anxiety subsided, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. I'd faced my fear and pushed through it, not conquered it entirely, but refused to let it dictate my actions. We reached Barker Pass with several hours of daylight remaining. The area featured an expansive meadow ringed by forest, with several established camping areas. We selected a spot slightly removed from the main clearings, preferring privacy to convenience. After setting up camp and preparing an early dinner, Wesley announced he had a surprise. Digging into an obscure corner of his pack, he produced a small plastic bag containing what looked like dried, shriveled mushroom pieces. "Been saving these for the right moment," he said with a grin. "Figured we'd pass the hardest parts of the hike, so tonight's the night." Thomas immediately recognized what Wesley had brought. "Psilocybin? Seriously?" "Golden teachers, to be precise," Wesley replied. "Nothing too intense, just enough for a mild experience." I'd never tried psychedelics before. Alcohol was my only real indulgence. I'd sampled marijuana and cigarettes in college, but disliked both. The idea of altering my consciousness in the wilderness initially struck me as reckless. "I don't know, man," I hesitated. "Is that really a good idea out here?" "We're not climbing anything tomorrow," Wesley reassured me. "The trail to Donner Pass is straightforward, and these are very mild. Nothing like what you're probably imagining." After considerable discussion, I agreed to try half the recommended dose. Wesley divided the mushrooms carefully, instructing me to break my portion into small pieces and swallow them with water rather than chewing. "The taste will make you gag," he warned. "Just swallow them like pills." I followed his instructions, washing down the fragments with several gulps of water. The pieces felt gritty going down my throat, but I managed to consume them all without incident. "Now we wait," Wesley said, settling back against his pack. "Should take about 45 minutes to start feeling anything." As dusk gathered around us, we maintained our campfire conversation as usual, though I found myself hyper-aware of any changes in perception. For a while, nothing happened beyond a slight sense of anticipation. Then gradually a warmth began spreading through my limbs. Colors seemed to intensify, the orange flames of our fire burning more vibrantly against the darkening sky. Sounds acquired new dimensions, the crackling wood separating into distinct components rather than blending into background noise. "Feeling anything yet?" Thomas asked with a knowing smile. "Everything's just..." "More," I replied, struggling to articulate the subtle changes in perception. As full darkness fell, the effects deepened. A profound sense of well-being washed over me, accompanied by occasional fits of laughter at comments that normally wouldn't seem particularly funny. The night sky, already spectacular in the mountain wilderness, became utterly mesmerizing, stars pulsing gently against the black backdrop. We wandered down to the shore of a small lake near our campsite, where moonlight created a silver pathway across the water's surface. The reflection seemed alive, breathing with the gentle ripples stirred by the night breeze. At one point, I found myself lagging behind my friends, transfixed by the night sky. Looking upward, the stars appeared arranged in three-dimensional space, rather than flattened against a black ceiling. The vastness became tangible, and I felt simultaneously insignificant and connected to everything. When I looked back down, momentarily dizzy from stargazing, a figure stood perhaps 40 yards away, partially obscured by shadows. Assuming it was one of my friends, I called out, "Hey, wait for me!" The figure turned and walked away, moving deeper into the darkness in the direction we'd come from earlier that day. What struck me as odd was how the figure's head remained turned toward me as it retreated, an unnatural angle that sent a shiver through my altered state. "Yo, this way, dude, come on." Thomas's voice came from behind me in the opposite direction. I turned to see both my friends standing together, waiting for me to join them. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through me. "I thought I saw someone over there," I said, pointing toward where the figure had been. Thomas and Wesley exchanged glances. "There's nobody else camping around here," Thomas said. "We checked the whole area earlier, remember? We discussed the sighting briefly, ultimately attributing it to the mild hallucination effects of the mushrooms, combined with the disorienting experience of staring at the stars." The explanation seemed reasonable, and my general sense of well-being quickly overshadowed any lingering unease. We returned to camp, continuing our conversations about everything and nothing until the effects began to fade. Eventually, we retired to our tents, surprisingly refreshed rather than drained by the experience. Despite the strange sighting, I fell asleep quickly, my consciousness sliding easily into dreams that I wouldn't remember upon waking. Dawn arrived with unexpected clarity. I'd feared grogginess or discomfort after the previous night's experiment, but instead felt oddly energized. Thomas and Wesley reported similar experiences, and we broke camp with renewed vigor. The fifth day presented our most significant challenge yet: 19 miles to Donner Pass. If we failed to complete this distance before nightfall, we'd need to spend an unplanned sixth night in the wilderness, stretching our food supplies beyond their intended limit. "We need to average about 2 miles per hour. Accounting for breaks," Thomas calculated as we studied the map over breakfast. "That means moving consistently and limiting our stops." We hit the trail by 5 a.m., hiking by headlamp through the first hour until daylight gradually illuminated our path. The route traversed varied terrain, forest trails, open meadows, and moderate climbs followed by long descents. By mid-morning, fatigue began setting in. The cumulative effect of 4 days hiking combined with the previous night's activities left us more drained than we'd anticipated. Each mile required increasingly conscious effort, and conversation dwindled as we conserved energy for the task at hand. "Remember, 1 foot in front of the other," Wesley encouraged during a brief water break. Nothing more complicated than that. The landscape provided ample distraction from our physical discomfort. We passed crystal-clear alpine lakes reflecting perfect mirror images of surrounding peaks. Meadows burst with late-season wildflowers, their colors vibrant against the green and brown backdrop. Occasionally we spotted wildlife, deer watching us cautiously from forest edges, marmots sunning themselves on rocks, hawks circling lazily overhead. As afternoon progressed, I developed painful blisters despite my well-broken-in boots. Each step became an exercise in controlled suffering, but turning back wasn't an option, nor was stopping short of our destination. I applied moleskin during breaks and adjusted my socks, finding minimal relief. The final 5 miles to Donner Pass proved particularly challenging, a sustained climb followed by a knee-jarring descent that tested our already depleted reserves. The sun began its westward decline, creating long shadows across the trail and adding urgency to our pace. "We're going to make it," Thomas insisted as we rounded a bend and caught our first glimpse of the pass in the distance. "Just keep moving." When we finally reached Donner Pass as the sun approached the horizon, exhaustion and elation mingled in equal measure. We'd completed our ambitious goal, 70 miles in 5 days, traversing some of the most beautiful and challenging terrain the Sierra Nevada had to offer. Finding a suitable campsite became our immediate priority. We selected a relatively sheltered location near a stand of pines, with enough open space for our 3 tents and a small fire ring left by previous campers. Setting up camp that evening required considerable willpower. Our bodies protested every movement, muscles trembling with fatigue, fingers fumbling with tasks that had become routine on previous days. But the knowledge that this represented our final night outdoors provided motivation to complete our chores properly. After erecting our tents and collecting firewood, we prepared our remaining food, a hodgepodge of leftovers from previous meals combined with special treats we'd saved for this final evening. The satisfaction of finishing every last food item rather than carrying it out added a small but meaningful pleasure to our meal. As darkness settled around us, we sat close to the fire, reflecting on the journey we'd completed. The flames cast flickering shadows across our faces, highlighting the weathered appearance we'd all acquired. Sun-reddened skin, wind-chapped lips, the particular kind of tiredness that comes from sustained physical exertion in the outdoors. "I can't believe we actually did it," I said, stretching my sore legs toward the fire's warmth. "Never doubted us for a second," Thomas replied, though his exhausted expression suggested otherwise. "We should make this an annual tradition," Wesley proposed. "Different trail each year, but same deal, challenging ourselves, getting away from everything." We discussed potential future routes, our voices growing gradually quieter as fatigue deepened. By 9:30, the conversation had dwindled to occasional comments punctuated by comfortable silences. That's when we heard the footsteps. The sound came from beyond the firelight, deliberate footfalls moving, through the underbrush approaching our camp, not the four-legged progress of a deer or bear, but the unmistakable gait of a human. We exchanged tense glances, suddenly alert despite our exhaustion. Encountering another hiker wasn't inherently concerning, but the timing, approaching our camp after dark without calling out, triggered instinctive wariness. Thomas reached subtly toward his pack, where I knew he kept his compact 9mm pistol. We'd debated bringing a firearm at all, ultimately deciding that a single handgun represented reasonable precaution without excessive paranoia or weight. The footsteps stopped just beyond the circle of light cast by our fire. After a moment's hesitation, a figure emerged from the darkness. My first impression was of wrongness, something fundamentally off about the man's appearance that I couldn't immediately identify. He stood slightly hunched with clothes that appeared worn and dirty, even in the forgiving light of our campfire. His hair formed an odd silhouette receding dramatically from his forehead but hanging limp elsewhere. "Nice night for it, huh?" he said, his voice carrying a strange, muffled quality. "Sure is," Thomas replied cautiously. As the man moved closer, the source of his unusual speech became apparent. One side of his lower jaw appeared concave as though a significant portion was simply missing. The resulting asymmetry distorted his entire face, creating an unsettling visual impression complemented by a noticeable limp as he approached. "Mind if I join you round the fire for a few before I carry on my way?" he asked, already moving toward an empty spot without waiting for our response. We exchanged quick glances. Despite his unsettling appearance, refusing hospitality to a solo hiker seemed unnecessarily harsh. The wilderness operated by different social rules than the city. Sharing fire and conversation represented basic courtesy. "You a hiker?" Wesley asked as the man settled opposite us. "I've been hiking around these hills for my whole life," he replied, stretching his hands toward the flames. In the flickering firelight, I noticed his eyes, small, deeply set, and appearing almost completely black. The effect might have resulted from the low angle of the fire casting shadows upward on his face, but the impression remained disturbing. His gaze held an intensity that made maintaining eye contact uncomfortable. "You live around here?" Thomas asked, maintaining a conversational tone despite the tension I could sense in his posture. "Me and my family have lived out here a long time," the man replied, drawing out the words while staring into the flames. Wesley caught my eye briefly, a silent communication passing between us. This interaction was veering into uncomfortable territory. The stranger's demeanor, his odd appearance, and his vague answers all contributed to a growing sense of unease. After a brief silence, the man looked up from the fire and asked, "What are you boys doing out here?" We provided a generic response about hiking the PCT segment, carefully avoiding specifics about our route or timeline. The conversation felt increasingly like a chess match, each side measuring responses and calculating implications. "You boys armed?" he asked abruptly, the question hanging in the air like wood smoke. Thomas hesitated before answering. "Yeah, we're armed." The man's eyes darted around our campsite, clearly assessing our equipment. "Don't see no rifles," he commented, a statement containing both observation and challenge. "Just got a pistol permit," Thomas explained reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable revealing this limitation. The stranger laughed quietly, a sound that contained no genuine mirth, before returning his gaze to the fire. After an uncomfortable silence, he asked, "Been telling any campfire tales?" The question seemed innocuous on its surface, but something in his delivery made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. Why would 3 grown men be telling campfire ghost stories? No, just catching up, Wesley replied. We've known each other since middle school. Want to hear one? The man asked, not waiting for our response before continuing. It's a true story, about 3 guys just like you hiking along the PCT. Without explicit agreement from us, he launched into his tale, describing 3 friends who had been hiking for days before making camp by a lake on their 4th night. As his narrative progressed, specific details emerged that couldn't be coincidental. Accurate descriptions of our route, timelines matching our journey, even references to locations where we'd camped. Most disturbing was his description of the 4th night, when the 3 dumbass city boys got drunk and started hootin' and hollerin' down by the lake, disturbing the peace of the good folk who made their homes among the hills. The realization hit all 3 of us simultaneously. He was describing our activities the previous night, including details he couldn't possibly know unless he'd been watching us. Moreover, his characterization grew increasingly contemptuous, peppered with derogatory terms and thinly veiled hostility. Wesley shifted uncomfortably. All right, I've heard enough. I think it's time you moved along, mister. The stranger ignored him completely, continuing his narrative as though we weren't present. His voice took on a rhythmic quality, almost sing-song in its delivery as he described our actions with disturbing accuracy. Wesley stood up, his posture communicating clear threat. Move along, he repeated, his voice hardening. The dark-eyed man paused briefly, looking up at Wesley with an expression hovering between amusement and contempt. Then he continued, his story taking an ominous turn. That's when the 3 dumb hikers realized there was no way the handsome stranger with the clubbed foot could have been following them. At least not alone, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. And that's about the same time they realized that attacking the handsome stranger might not be very smart. Not if he had a bunch of his cousins waiting in the darkness just beyond the firelight. He continued, describing these cousins who apparently carried enough boom to send the hikers off to the big sleep without them even knowing what hit them. The implication was unmistakable, a threat delivered through the thin veneer of storytelling. That's why, when the handsome stranger was done speaking, the 3 little hiker boys just sat there on their asses like 3 little bitches and watched the handsome stranger, whose family had lived in those hills for a long time, stand up and walk away. With that conclusion, he rose to his feet in one fluid motion, surprising agility from someone who had entered our camp with a pronounced limp. See you around, boys, he said, then turned and walked into the darkness beyond our fire. As his figure disappeared from sight, we heard multiple sets of footsteps moving away from our camp, not just his alone, but what sounded like numerous individuals moving in coordinated retreat. The sounds continued just long enough to convey a message. You are surrounded, outnumbered, and at our mercy. For several minutes after the stranger's departure, none of us spoke. The crackling fire, previously a source of comfort, now seemed insufficient protection against the darkness surrounding us. Each shadow at the periphery of our vision suggested watching eyes. Each rustle of wind through trees became potential movement. We need to leave, Thomas finally said, his voice low but firm. Now. Neither Wesley nor I argued. The implicit threat in the stranger's story left little doubt that remaining at our current location would be foolish at best, dangerous at worst. The question wasn't whether to move, but how to do so safely. Pack only essentials, Thomas continued, already moving toward his tent. Leave anything unnecessary behind. We need to travel light and fast. We dismantled our camp with practiced efficiency amplified by adrenaline, stuffing sleeping bags and essential gear into our packs while abandoning cooking equipment and other non-critical items. Thomas kept his pistol in hand throughout the process, occasionally pausing to scan the perimeter beyond our firelight. Water, food, shelter, first aid, Wesley muttered, a mantra helping him prioritize what to take. Within 15 minutes, we had packed our essential gear and extinguished the fire, plunging our campsite into darkness broken only by our headlamps. The sudden absence of firelight made the surrounding forest seem to press inward, teeming with unseen presences. Which way? I whispered as we shouldered our lightened packs. Thomas consulted his map by headlamp, tracing potential routes with his finger. We continue toward Donner Pass. That's where our car is parked anyway. If we push another few miles tonight, we'll be well away from here. Shouldn't we go back the way we came? Wesley asked. We know that terrain better. That's exactly what they'd expect, Thomas replied. Plus, it's farther to safety. Forward is our best option. We set out in single file, Thomas leading with his headlamp set to its dimmest setting, providing just enough illumination to navigate without broadcasting our position. I followed second with Wesley bringing up the rear, frequently glancing behind us to ensure we weren't being followed. Moving through forest at night presents unique challenges. Shadows create optical illusions, transforming fallen logs into crouching figures and swaying branches into reaching arms. Normal woodland sounds amplify, while the crunch of our own footsteps seems thunderous against the background silence. We maintained this nerve-wracking progress for nearly 2 hours, covering approximately 4 miles before physical exhaustion, and the increasing difficulty of nighttime navigation forced us to reconsider our strategy. We need to find somewhere defensible to rest, Thomas whispered during a brief water break. Somewhere we can see anyone approaching. After careful consideration, we selected a position on slightly elevated ground with good visibility in all directions and minimal overhead canopy. The location wasn't ideal for comfortable camping but provided tactical advantages that now took priority over comfort. We established a rudimentary camp, laying out sleeping bags but not erecting tents. By mutual agreement, we established a watch rotation, one person alert while the others attempted to rest. I volunteered for first watch, too wired with residual adrenaline to consider sleep. Sitting with my back against a tree trunk, pistol within easy reach, I scanned the surrounding darkness for any sign of movement. The moon provided intermittent illumination as clouds drifted across its face, casting shifting patterns across the forest floor. Despite my vigilance, fear played tricks on my senses. Every shadow contained potential threat. Every sound merited investigation. The stranger's words replayed in my mind. His accurate knowledge of our movements, his veiled threats, the unmistakable sounds of multiple sets of footsteps retreating from our camp. Who was he? What did he want? The questions circled without resolution. 2 hours later, I woke Thomas for his watch and crawled into my sleeping bag, though true sleep proved elusive. My consciousness hovered in that liminal space between wakefulness and dreams, alert to every sound while exhaustion pulled at the edges of my mind. When dawn finally arrived, bringing pale light filtering through tree branches, it felt like deliverance. Darkness had amplified our fears. Daylight restored perspective and rationality. No signs of anyone following us, Wesley reported after scouting our back trail. I think we're clear. Though relief tempered our anxiety, we maintained heightened awareness as we prepared to continue toward Donner Pass. Our overnight flight had disrupted our planned itinerary, but safety concerns outweighed scheduling considerations. 4 more miles to the trailhead, Thomas announced after consulting the map. Should reach it by mid-morning if we keep a good pace. We set out with determination, each step carrying us closer to civilization and further from the previous night's disturbing encounter. The forest around us gradually transitioned from threatening to merely scenic, sunshine illuminating familiar terrain rather than concealing unknown dangers. As we hiked, we discussed the encounter, attempting to process what had happened and what it might mean. Maybe he was just trying to scare us, Wesley suggested. Some local who gets his kicks frightening hikers. That doesn't explain how he knew details about our trip, I countered. He described exactly where we'd been, what we'd done. Could have been following us for days, Thomas said grimly, watching us from a distance. But how? I asked. We covered 19 miles yesterday. No way he could keep pace with that limp. We had no satisfactory answers, unless there really were others, Thomas said after a long pause. Maybe they work as a group tracking hikers through the wilderness. The idea sent a fresh wave of unease through me. One disturbing stranger was troubling enough. The thought of an organized group deliberately stalking hikers through remote wilderness elevated our experience from unsettling to potentially dangerous. But why? Wesley asked. What's the point? They didn't rob us or hurt us. Intimidation, Thomas replied, establishing territory. Maybe they don't want outsiders in their wilderness. We fell silent as we continued walking, each lost in our own thoughts. The morning sun strengthened, burning away lingering mist and warming the air around us. Under different circumstances, this final stretch would have represented triumph, the successful completion of our ambitious trek. Instead, we moved with wary efficiency, constantly scanning our surroundings, jumping at unexpected sounds. The forest gradually thinned as we approached Donner Pass, the trail widening and evidence of human activity increasing, carved initials in tree trunks, occasional litter, boot prints in muddy sections. These signs of civilization, normally unwelcome intrusions in wilderness, now provided reassurance. When we finally emerged at the trailhead parking lot shortly before noon, the sense of relief was overwhelming. Thomas's SUV sat exactly where we'd left it 5 days earlier, dusty but undisturbed. The mundane sight of other parked vehicles and distant highway sounds represented safety in their ordinariness. "We made it," Wesley said simply, dropping his pack beside the car. We loaded our gear quickly, eager to put distance between ourselves and the wilderness that had transformed from sanctuary to threat. As Thomas started the engine, I glanced back toward the trailhead, half expecting to see our limping visitor watching our departure. The trail entrance remained empty, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. The drive home passed largely in silence, each of us processing the experience in our own way. The familiar landscape of highways and towns gradually replaced forest and mountains, civilization reasserting its comforting predictability around us. We stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, our first proper meal in days. The simple pleasure of hot food, unlimited coffee, and climate-controlled comfort helped restore some normality, though conversation remained subdued. "So what do we tell people when they ask about the trip?" Wesley finally asked, pushing away his empty plate. "The truth," Thomas replied without hesitation, "at least about the hiking part. It was amazing until that last night." "And what about that part?" I asked. Thomas considered before answering, "I don't know. Who would believe us anyway? We met a creepy guy in the woods who knew too much about us. Sounds like the beginning of a bad horror movie." "Or the end of one," Wesley added grimly. We arrived back in town by early evening, dropping Wesley at his apartment first, then Thomas driving me home. Standing in my driveway as Thomas prepared to leave, I felt strangely reluctant to say goodbye, as though our shared experience had created a bond that ordinary life might quickly erode. "Hey," Thomas said, rolling down his window. "We should get together next weekend. Process all this." I nodded gratefully. "Definitely." Entering my empty apartment felt surreal after 5 days outdoors. Everything appeared exactly as I'd left it. Mail stacked on the counter, dishes drying in the rack. Laundry basket half full, yet somehow altered by my absence and what had transpired during it. I showered, savoring the luxury of hot water and soap, watching dirt from the trail swirl down the drain. Physical cleanliness provided temporary relief, but couldn't wash away the lingering unease that had embedded itself in my consciousness. That night, sleep came reluctantly, despite my exhaustion. When I finally drifted off, my dreams filled with shadowed forests and watching eyes, I woke repeatedly, sweating and disoriented, convinced someone stood in the darkness of my bedroom. The following days brought gradual reintegration into normal life, returning to work, catching up on neglected responsibilities, fielding questions about our hiking adventure. I provided edited versions of our experience, emphasizing the breathtaking scenery and physical challenge while omitting the disturbing conclusion. True to his word, Thomas organized a get-together the following weekend. We met at his apartment, ordering pizza and drinking beer while discussing our encounter on more comfortable terrain. "I've been doing some research," Thomas announced, opening his laptop. "Looking into Donner Pass history, local legends, anything that might explain what happened." "Find anything?" Wesley asked, leaning forward. "Nothing specific to our experience," Thomas admitted. "But Donner Pass has a dark history beyond the famous wagon train disaster. There are stories about mountain communities that developed in isolation, people who retreated from civilization and created their own societies with their own rules." "You think our friend was part of something like that?" I asked. It's possible. Remote areas attract people seeking separation from mainstream society, sometimes for innocent reasons, sometimes not. What about his physical appearance? Wesley wondered. That jaw deformity, the limp, those seemed pretty distinctive. Thomas nodded. Could indicate genetic isolation, a small population interbreeding over generations, or could be the result of injury or limited medical care. We continued speculating, finding some comfort in attempting to rationalize our experience. Yet beneath our theoretical discussion ran a current of genuine concern, not just about what had happened, but what might have happened under slightly different circumstances. In the weeks that followed, I found myself increasingly drawn to researching similar incidents. I scoured hiking forums, PCT journals, and local news archives for reports of unsettling encounters in the Desolation Wilderness area. While I discovered occasional vague references to unfriendly locals or strange encounters, nothing matched the specific details of our experience. Gradually, the intensity of my unease diminished, though it never completely disappeared. I continued hiking and camping, refusing to allow one disturbing incident to rob me of activities I valued. But I made adjustments, choosing more populated trails, always hiking with companions, maintaining heightened awareness of my surroundings. Thomas, Wesley, and I planned another PCT section hike the following year, selecting a different segment farther north. The experience proved enjoyable, but lacked the pristine isolation of our previous adventure, partly by design, partly because something fundamental had shifted in our perception of wilderness. We never again encountered the limping stranger or anyone resembling him. Yet occasionally, while traveling remote trails or sitting beside evening campfires, I catch myself listening intently to the surrounding darkness, alert for footsteps approaching from beyond the firelight. Sometimes, when deep forest shadows gather particularly densely, or when night falls especially dark, I remember his parting words, "See you around, boys," and wonder if somewhere among the ancient trees and silent mountains, hidden eyes still watch for unwelcome visitors traversing what they consider their territory. The wilderness remains beautiful, awe-inspiring, and worth exploring, but I've learned that its vastness conceals more than natural wonders. It harbors human mysteries as well, some of which might be better left undisturbed. When people ask about my most memorable hiking experience, I tell them about ascending Dick's Pass, about stars reflecting in crystal-clear alpine lakes, about the profound connection to nature that can only be found through immersion in wild places. I don't tell them about the dark-eyed man with the missing jaw, or the sound of multiple footsteps retreating into darkness, or the lingering sense that in certain remote corners of wilderness, visitors are merely tolerated, never truly welcome. Some stories belong to the forest, and some fears once awakened never completely subside, remaining instead as shadows at the edge of consciousness, reminders that beyond our carefully constructed world of predictability and safety lurks the unknown, watching and waiting for opportunities to remind us of our fundamental vulnerability. Every time I lace up my hiking boots, I remember this truth. And every time I venture into wilderness, I do so with both appreciation and caution, knowing that beauty and danger often occupy the same spaces, separated only by circumstance and the thin veneer of civilization we so easily take for granted. I never wanted to go to Shadow Creek Camp. That should have been my first instinct to follow, but at 13, what did I know about premonitions or the value of gut feelings? The brochure arrived in late February 2019, printed on glossy paper that showed smiling children canoeing across a serene lake, hiking through lush forests, and sitting around campfires. My parents had been arguing about money for months, their hushed voices carrying through the thin walls of our small home when they thought I was asleep. The camp was offering scholarships, and my science teacher had nominated me. "It's a wonderful opportunity, James," my mother said, her eyes bright with an enthusiasm I couldn't match. 2 weeks in nature, learning about ecology and wilderness survival. You'll make new friends. I had so few at Westridge Middle School that the word sounded foreign. I was the quiet kid who preferred books to basketball, who sketched detailed maps of imaginary places during lunch break, while others tossed food and insults across the cafeteria. "I don't know," I replied, running my finger along the edge of the application form. Something about it feels off. My father lowered his newspaper, a rare moment of attention. That camp is prestigious, son. Kids who attend Shadow Creek often get fast-tracked for scholarships later. The director, Dr. Richard Bennett, is well respected in educational circles. So I relented, filled out the forms, wrote the required essay about why I want to connect with nature. Received the acceptance letter 3 weeks later with a packing list and a congratulatory note signed by Dr. Bennett himself, the handwriting sharp and angular. The night before departure, I stood at my bedroom window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the neighborhood before plunging it back into darkness, a perfect metaphor for what lay ahead, though I didn't recognize it then. My mother appeared in the doorway. All packed? I nodded, gesturing to the duffel bag by my bed. You'll be fine, she said, mistaking my silence for anxiety about being away from home. It's only 2 weeks. Only 2 weeks. It would be the longest 14 days of my life. The bus journey to Shadow Creek took 4 hours, winding through increasingly remote countryside until cell service disappeared entirely. 28 students from various schools across the county sat in uneasy silence, most of us strangers to one another. I claimed a seat near the back, watching raindrops race each other down the window while our chaperone, Ms. Winters, attempted to generate enthusiasm with camp songs nobody joined. As we turned onto a narrow gravel road, the bus lurched violently, throwing us against our seatbelts. Ms. Winters apologized with a nervous laugh. Almost there, everyone. Shadow Creek has been operating since 1962, and it's one of the most beautiful locations in the state. The main lodge was originally a hunting retreat for wealthy businessmen. I pressed my face closer to the glass. The forest had grown denser, old-growth pines blocking out much of the afternoon light. Occasional breaks in the tree line revealed glimpses of rocky cliffs and deep ravines. No wonder the camp was named Shadow Creek. Shadows seemed to cling to everything, even in daylight. The bus finally emerged into a clearing where several wooden buildings clustered around what appeared to be the main lodge, a 3-story structure that more closely resembled an old sanitarium than any retreat I'd imagined. Victorian in style, with a steep roof and narrow windows, it loomed against the backdrop of mountains like something transported from another era. "Everyone out!" Ms. Winters called, her cheerfulness sounding increasingly forced. "Grab your bags from underneath and line up by the steps." Rain had given way to mist, a fine vapor that clung to skin and clothes. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, but underneath lurked another scent I couldn't identify, metallic, almost like old pennies. 7 counselors stood in a row on the lodge steps, all wearing identical forest green shirts with the Shadow Creek emblem, a silhouette of pine trees reflected in water. They looked college-aged, but something about their stiff postures and vacant smiles set me on edge. A tall, lean man descended the steps with measured precision. His white hair was cropped close to his scalp, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on a narrow nose. Despite the humidity, his button-down shirt remained crisp and unwrinkled. "Welcome to Shadow Creek," he announced, his voice carrying across the clearing without shouting. "I am Dr. Bennett, camp director. You have been chosen because you represent the brightest young minds in the county. Our program is rigorous, educational, and designed to push you beyond your comfort zones." His eyes swept across us, pausing briefly on each face as though taking mental photographs. When his gaze reached me, I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "The rules are simple," he continued. "Follow instructions from counselors at all times. Respect nature and each other. The forest surrounding us is vast and unforgiving to those who wander. Cabin assignments are posted inside. Dinner is at 6. Orientation begins immediately after." As we filed toward the lodge, I noticed several security cameras mounted discreetly under the eaves. For a nature camp deep in the wilderness, Shadow Creek seemed surprisingly concerned with surveillance. I was assigned to Cabin Pine with 6 other boys. Our counselor, Howard, led us to a structure on the eastern edge of the clearing. Unlike the imposing main lodge, the cabin was simple: wooden bunks, a small bathroom, and windows that rattled when the wind blew. "Choose your beds," Howard instructed, his tone flat. "Unpack quickly. 5 minutes until we tore the grounds. I selected a bottom bunk near the back as far from the door as possible. As I stowed my duffel underneath, a lanky boy with copper-colored hair claimed the bunk above mine. "I'm Brendan," he whispered, extending a hand. "From Lakeside Academy." "James," I replied, noticing how Brendan's eyes darted nervously toward Howard, who stood watching us with an unsettling stillness. Another boy approached, shorter, with dark curly hair and glasses. "I'm Victor," he said quietly. "Is it just me, or does this place feel weird to anyone else?" Before either of us could answer, Howard clapped his hands sharply. "Time to move. Stay together. No stragglers." As we exited the cabin, I glanced back through the window. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing between the trees at the forest's edge, motionless, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. The tour revealed Shadow Creek's layout, the main lodge containing the dining hall, infirmary, and administrative offices. 6 cabins arranged in a semicircle, a boathouse by the lake, and various activity areas scattered throughout the grounds. Everything looked well-maintained but oddly dated, as though time had slowed here sometime in the 1970s. Dr. Bennett reappeared at dinner, sitting at a raised table with 2 adults I hadn't seen before. A woman with a severe bun who was introduced as Dr. Patricia Wells, the camp psychologist, and a broad-shouldered man named Michael Harris, head of security. "Security?" Victor whispered as we pushed bland meatloaf around our plates. "What exactly are they securing out here?" Brendan leaned closer. "I heard some of the counselors talking. Apparently there was an incident a few years ago. A student went missing in the woods. Did they find him?" I asked, my appetite vanishing. "They just said the program was suspended for evaluation that year. Nothing else." Across the dining hall, Howard and the other counselors ate methodically, barely speaking to one another. Their synchronized movements reminded me of robots performing a routine. After dinner came orientation in the lodge's assembly room, a cavernous space with wooden benches and a small stage. Dr. Bennett detailed our daily schedule. Breakfast at 7, morning activities until noon, lunch, afternoon sessions, dinner, evening programming, lights out at 10. "Tomorrow we begin with water sampling at the lake," he explained, clicking through a presentation showing graphs of pH levels and bacterial counts. "Shadow Creek is home to several unique microorganisms we've been monitoring for decades." As he spoke, I noticed Dr. Wells studying the students, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal. Her eyes lingered on certain individuals, including Victor, who fidgeted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Finally, we were dismissed to our cabins. The sky had cleared, revealing a canopy of stars untouched by light pollution. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful. Howard escorted us back, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Showers, then bed," he instructed. "No talking after lights out." The bathroom facilities were basic but clean. 4 shower stalls with lukewarm water and rust-stained tiles. I waited until last, uncomfortable with the idea of being naked in a strange place. By the time I finished and returned to the main room, everyone else was already in their bunks. At precisely 10 o'clock, Howard flipped the light switch. "Sleep well?" he said, though nothing in his tone suggested he cared whether we did or not. He settled into a chair by the door, his silhouette visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Is he staying?" whispered a voice from across the room. "Quiet," Howard said sharply. "First warning." Hours passed. The cabin filled with the sounds of breathing, an occasional snore, the creaking of wood as the night air cooled. I lay awake staring at the underside of Brendan's mattress, trying to ignore the feeling that something fundamental about this place was wrong. It must have been close to midnight when I heard it, a soft scraping against the cabin's exterior wall. Then a tapping, deliberate and rhythmic, moving from window to window. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. Above me, Brendan's breathing hitched. He was awake too. The tapping continued, circling the cabin. Howard remained motionless in his chair, giving no indication he heard anything unusual. Then came the whispering, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, gradually resolving into what sounded like words in a language I couldn't identify. The voices seemed to emanate from all directions at once, rising and falling in disturbing harmony. I pulled my blanket higher, covering my ears, but it did nothing to block the sound. The whispers persisted for what felt like hours before finally subsiding around 3 a.m. according to my watch. Only then did I manage to fall into a fitful sleep, filled with dreams of dark figures moving through trees. When Howard woke us at 6:30, his expression betrayed nothing. "Breakfast in 30 minutes, he said briskly. "Don't be late." As we dressed, I caught Victor's eye. The haunted look on his face confirmed I hadn't imagined the night's disturbances. Brendan too seemed pale, dark circles shadowing his eyes. "Did you?" Victor began quietly. "Not now," Brendan cut him off, glancing meaningfully toward Howard. Outside, the morning was beautiful, mist rising from the lake, sunlight filtering through the pines, birds calling from the forest. It was as though the night's strangeness had been a collective hallucination. But as we walked to breakfast, I noticed something that stopped me cold. 3 parallel scratches on the cabin's exterior wall, fresh enough that splinters still protruded from the wood. They ran from window to window exactly where the tapping had traced its path. Morning activities began with water sampling at Shadow Creek Lake, a crescent-shaped body of water nestled against the base of a steep cliff. Despite the sunshine, the water appeared unnaturally dark, its surface reflecting the surrounding pines like black glass. Dr. Bennett himself led this session, distributing test tubes, pipettes, and digital pH meters with the efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual countless times. "Shadow Creek Lake has unique properties," he explained, his voice taking on a passionate quality I hadn't heard before. "Its depth exceeds 200 feet at the center, and the bottom waters haven't mixed with the surface in over a century. We call it a meromictic lake, extremely rare in this region." We worked in pairs, collecting samples from different depths and locations. Victor became my partner by default when others quickly paired up. Together, we rowed a small aluminum boat to the center of the lake, where Dr. Bennett had instructed us to collect our deepest sample. "I can't see the bottom," Victor remarked, peering over the side. "It's just darkness." The specialized sampling device, a cylindrical container attached to a marked rope, extended far below us. When we finally pulled it up from the designated depth, the water inside was different from our surface samples, murky with a faint reddish tinge. "That doesn't look right," I said, holding the container up to the light. Victor frowned. "It smells weird too, almost like blood," I finished quietly. We exchanged uneasy glances before securing the sample in its test tube as instructed. When we returned to shore, Dr. Bennett collected our specimens with unusual enthusiasm, examining our deep water sample with particular interest. "Excellent work," he said, his eyes gleaming behind his glasses. "The microbial communities at extreme depths are quite special." As the morning progressed, I noticed Dr. Wells observing from the shoreline, making notes in her ever-present journal. When she caught me looking, she smiled, a tight, calculated expression that didn't reach her eyes. During a brief break, Brendan sidled up to me. "Did you see those scratches on our cabin this morning?" I nodded, from whatever was making that tapping sound last night. "Howard acted like he didn't hear anything," Victor added, joining our huddle. "But there's no way he didn't, it was so loud." "Maybe the counselors are in on it," suggested Brendan. "Some kind of psychological experiment." Victor shook his head. "My dad's a lawyer. They can't experiment on minors without consent." "Unless that's what our parents signed," I said darkly, remembering the thick packet of forms my mother had hastily reviewed. Our conversation ended abruptly when Howard approached. "Break's over. Dr. Bennett wants everyone back at the water's edge." For the remainder of the morning, we cataloged our findings, measuring pH, temperature, and oxygen levels from each sample. The deep water specimens consistently showed anomalies, higher metal content, unusual bacterial readings, and that persistent reddish tinge that nobody else seemed concerned about. As we packed up the equipment, I gazed across the lake toward the cliff face on the opposite shore. Something about its jagged profile nagged at me, like a half-remembered dream. I squinted, trying to bring it into focus. "James, come on," Victor called, already walking with the others toward the path. I turned to follow, but not before catching a glimpse of movement along the cliff's edge, a dark figure standing sentinel above the water. When I looked again, it was gone, During lunch, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The dining hall's high ceilings and exposed beams created perfect shadowy recesses for observation. Twice I caught Dr. Wells staring at our table, and once I noticed Michael Harris, the security head, speaking into a radio while looking in our direction. "We need to be careful what we say," I whispered to Brendan and Victor. "I think they're monitoring specific students." "Why?" Victor asked. "We haven't done anything wrong." Brendan pushed his food around his plate. "Maybe it's not about what we've done. Maybe it's about what they think we might see or figure out." That afternoon brought forest ecology lessons, identifying native plants, tracking animal signs, and learning about the ecosystem's delicate balance. Our group was led by a female counselor named Elise, whose monotone delivery matched Howard's in its lack of inflection. As we moved deeper into the woods, I began noticing oddities: trees with symbols carved into their trunks, hidden camera housings disguised as birdhouses, and occasional clearings where nothing grew, despite the surrounding vegetation's lushness. When I pointed out a particularly strange marking to Victor, 3 vertical lines intersected by a horizontal slash, Elise suddenly appeared beside us. "That's from a bear," she said, though the cuts were too precise, too intentional to be from animal claws. "Stay with the group, please." That night, the whispers returned, earlier and louder than before. They seemed to seep through the walls themselves, filling the cabin with disembodied voices that rose and fell in disturbing cadence. Howard remained at his post by the door, seemingly oblivious, while around me my cabin mates pulled pillows over their heads in futile attempts to block the sound. I lay rigid in my bunk, listening despite myself, trying to discern words or meaning in the unintelligible sounds. Just when I thought the noise couldn't get more unsettling, a new element joined the chorus. A low, rhythmic drumming from somewhere deep in the forest. The combination of whispers and drums continued until precisely 3:17 a.m., according to my watch, then stopped simultaneously as though someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the sounds had been. In the morning, new scratches decorated the cabin walls, deeper this time, and arranged in patterns that matched the symbols I'd seen carved into trees. When I tried to take a photo with the disposable camera I'd brought, Howard appeared from nowhere and confiscated it. "No unauthorized documentation," he said flatly. Camp policy. At breakfast, I noticed 3 empty seats at adjacent tables. When I asked about the missing students, Counselor Elise explained they'd fallen ill during the night and were recovering in the infirmary. "Nothing serious," she assured us with that same emotionless smile. "Just adjustment to the altitude and new environment." But as we filed out for morning activities, I glimpsed Dr. Wells escorting one of the 6 students, a girl with long brown hair, toward the main lodge's restricted 3rd floor. The girl moved stiffly, eyes fixed straight ahead, responding neither to questions nor commands, but following like a sleepwalker. Something was happening at Shadow Creek Camp, something beyond strange noises and wall scratches, something systematic and deliberate, and somehow I was certain that whatever it was, it all connected back to the unnaturally dark waters of Shadow Creek Lake. By the 4th day, 7 students had been taken to the infirmary with similar adjustment symptoms, including one from our cabin, a quiet boy named Patrick who'd spent the previous night whimpering in his sleep. None had returned. Brendan, Victor, and I formed an unspoken alliance, staying close during activities and developing subtle signals to warn each other when counselors approached. The constant surveillance made open discussion impossible, but we managed brief exchanges during bathroom breaks or when ambient noise provided cover. "My bunk is right by the window," Brendan whispered during archery practice, notching an arrow while Howard's attention was elsewhere. "Last night I saw people moving through the woods with flashlights heading toward the lake." Victor aimed at his target. "I've been keeping track of who gets taken to the infirmary. It's always after they show signs of hearing the whispers. Patrick was covering his ears at dinner, remember?" I nodded, thinking of Patrick's frightened eyes as Howard had escorted him away at breakfast. "We need to see what's in that infirmary." "Impossible," Victor replied. "It's in the restricted section of the lodge. Key card access only." But an opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. That afternoon, during the scheduled swimming lesson at the lake, which most students now approached with visible reluctance, I developed a convincing nosebleed. the result of a discreet knuckle to the nostril when no one was looking. "I need to go to the infirmary," I told Elise, blood streaming down my face and onto my shirt for maximum effect. She hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the liability of an injured camper. "Howard will take you," she decided, signaling to my cabin counselor. Howard escorted me silently up the path toward the main lodge, his grip on my arm unnecessarily firm. We entered through a side door and climbed to the second floor, where a sign marked infirmary hung above a frosted glass door. The medical space was clinically white and surprisingly modern compared to the rest of the camp. Fluorescent lighting, stainless steel equipment, and a row of 6 hospital-style beds separated by curtains. Only 2 were occupied, both by students lying motionless under thin blankets, felines running into their arms. A middle-aged woman in scrubs approached us, her name tag identifying her as Nurse Galloway. "What happened?" she asked, guiding me to an examination table. "Nosebleed," Howard reported before I could speak. "During lake activities." Something in his emphasis on lake made Nurse Galloway's expression change subtly. She nodded, understanding some hidden meaning. "I'll handle this," she told Howard. "You can return to your group." Howard left, and Nurse Galloway set about treating my nosebleed with efficient, impersonal movements. As she worked, I tried to glimpse the other patients, but the curtains blocked my view. "Are those the students who got sick?" I asked, attempting to sound casual. "Will they be okay?" "They're fine," she replied automatically. "Just resting. They've been resting for days. We're worried about them." Her hands paused briefly. "There's no need for concern. Dr. Bennett has everything under control." "What's wrong with them, exactly?" Nurse Galloway's eyes narrowed. "You ask a lot of questions." "Just curious," I said, feigning innocence. "Science is about asking questions, right? That's what Dr. Bennett told us." She finished treating my nose in silence, then wrote something on a chart. Before dismissing me, she picked up a small penlight. "Look here," she instructed, shining it directly into my eyes. "Standard procedure for head-related injuries." The light was unexpectedly bright, making me wince. She examined each eye carefully, then made another note. "You can go back to activities now," she said, her tone noticeably cooler. "Follow the main staircase down." Instead of leaving immediately, I asked to use the bathroom. She pointed to a door at the far end of the infirmary, watching as I walked past the occupied beds. In that brief passage, I managed to glimpse through a gap in one curtain. The patient was Patrick, lying absolutely still with eyes open but vacant, staring at the ceiling. An IV bag hanging beside his bed contained not clear fluid but something dark and reddish, similar to our deep water sample from the lake. The bathroom provided a moment's privacy to process what I'd seen. When I emerged, Nurse Galloway was speaking quietly into a phone, her back turned. I caught fragments. "Showing curiosity, may need monitoring, lake exposure minimal so far." She hung up when she noticed me, then personally escorted me downstairs and outside, where Howard was waiting as though he'd never left. "Return to your group," he instructed, but something in his expression had changed, a new attentiveness when he looked at me that raised the hairs on my neck. That evening at dinner, I noticed Dr. Wells watching me from the staff table, her journal open before her. When our eyes met, she didn't look away but instead made a deliberate note while maintaining eye contact. "They're on to you," Victor murmured under his breath. "Whatever you saw in that infirmary must have been important." "They're putting something in those kids," I whispered back. "Something from the lake." Brendan leaned in. "Tonight after lights out, we need to talk. Really talk. This is worse than we thought." But that conversation never happened. When we returned to our cabin, Howard announced a change. He would now be sleeping inside with us rather than merely sitting by the door. His cot was positioned to provide a clear view of all bunks. The whispering began as usual after dark, accompanied by the distant drums, but something else joined them this night. A low, sustained tone like a massive horn or didgeridoo, vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. I pressed my pillow against my ears, fighting the sound's strange pull. Across the room I could see Victor doing the same, his face contorted in discomfort. But Brendan in the bunk above me had gone rigid, his eyes wide open and fixed on the ceiling. I reached up to shake his arm, trying to break whatever hold the sound had on him, But Howard's voice cut through the darkness. "Stay in your own bunk, James," he said sharply. "First warning." I retreated, watching helplessly as Brendan's breathing synchronized with the pulsing horn sound. By morning, he was unresponsive, physically present but mentally elsewhere, following basic commands but unable to speak or respond to questions. Howard escorted him to the infirmary before breakfast. Victor and I exchanged terrified glances over our untouched food. "It's the sound," Victor whispered when we had a moment alone during morning activities. "It does something to your brain." Brendan was fighting it at first, but then he just gave in. "We need to get out of here," I replied. "Tonight. We can't wait any longer." But we'd underestimated how closely we were being watched. When afternoon activities ended, Dr. Bennett himself approached us. "James, Victor," he said pleasantly, "Dr. Wells would like to speak with you. A routine psychological assessment. We do them with all campers." We had no choice but to follow him to the main lodge, where Dr. Wells waited in a small office lined with bookcases. Her infamous journal lay open on the desk. "Sit down, boys," she invited, her smile not reaching her cold eyes. "Let's talk about what you're experiencing at Shadow Creek." Dr. Wells interviewed us separately, Victor first, then me. As I waited outside her office, I could hear only murmurs through the heavy wooden door. But Victor's face when he emerged told me everything I needed to know. He looked defeated, his earlier defiance replaced by a dull compliance as Howard led him away. When my turn came, Dr. Wells gestured to the chair across from her desk. "James," she began, consulting her notes, "your counselors report you've been asking many questions about our program. Curiosity is natural, but yours seems targeted." "I'm just trying to understand," I replied, aiming for innocence but hearing the tremor in my voice. "This camp is different than I expected." "Different how?" "The focus on the lake, for one thing. And the night sounds." Her pen paused above her journal. "What night sounds, James?" It was a trap. I could see it in her steady gaze. If I admitted hearing the whispers and drums, I'd likely end up like Brendan and the others. If I denied it, she'd know I was lying. "Just normal forest sounds," I hedged. "Wind animals. Sometimes it's hard to sleep in a new place." Dr. Wells studied me for a long moment before making a note. "Your psychological profile indicated high intelligence and adaptability. Your application essay showed remarkable insight for someone your age. These qualities are why you were selected." "Selected for what exactly?" "For Shadow Creek's advanced curriculum, of course." Her smile tightened. "Now, I'd like you to look at some images and tell me what you see." She produced a series of cards similar to Rorschach ink blots, but these patterns seemed deliberately engineered, complex geometries that shifted and pulsed the longer I stared at them. Each made my head throb slightly, reminiscent of the night sounds effect. "Just shapes," I said, deliberately looking away from each card after only a brief glance. "Random patterns." Her disappointment was palpable. "I see. One final test, then." From her desk drawer, she removed what looked like a small tuning fork attached to an electronic device. When she struck it, no audible sound emerged. But suddenly my vision blurred, and pressure built behind my eyes, the same sensation as during the night horns. I gripped the chair arms, fighting to stay focused. "What is that?" "A specialized frequency test," Dr. Wells replied, watching me intently. "Your reaction is interesting." She made several more notes, then closed her journal. "You may return to your cabin now. Howard will escort you." As I stood, dizziness washed over me, whether from the tuning fork's effects or simple fear. I couldn't tell. Dr. Wells remained seated, but her parting words followed me to the door. "Remember, James, resistance only prolongs the adjustment period. Your friends have already accepted the process. They're much happier now." Howard waited in the hallway, his blank expression revealing nothing of what he might have overheard. As he led me back toward the cabin, we passed a partially open door labeled Records, where Michael Harris, the security head, was speaking with Dr. Bennett. "Ninth cycle shows the most promising results yet," Harris was saying, "especially subjects exposed to deeper water samples." Dr. Bennett's reply was too quiet to catch, but the door remained ajar as we passed. In that brief moment, I glimpsed walls lined with filing cabinets and a large map of the camp, marked with red pins concentrated around the lake. That night, with Victor withdrawn and silent in his bunk and Brendan's above mine ominously empty. The sounds came again, whispers, drums, and horns in terrible harmony. Howard sat vigilant by the door, occasionally scanning our bunks to ensure compliance. I feigned sleep while plotting desperately. Whatever was happening at Shadow Creek, it centered on the lake and affected the mind somehow. The sick students were receiving infusions of lake water, and the night sounds weakened resistance to something. Dr. Wells had all but admitted I was being prepared for an adjustment or process. Around 2 a.m., when the sounds reached their nightly peak, opportunity arrived in an unexpected form. A counselor I hadn't seen before entered our cabin and whispered urgently to Howard. After a brief exchange, Howard followed her outside, leaving us momentarily unattended. I moved instantly, slipping from my bunk and gesturing frantically to Victor. "Now's our chance," I hissed. "Records room, main lodge." Victor stared at me blankly before slowly shaking his head. "No point," he mumbled. "They'll just find us." With horror, I realized the sounds had already affected him more deeply than I'd thought. There was no time to convince him. Howard could return any second. "I'll come back for you," I promised, then slipped out the side window into the night. The compound was eerily lit by occasional security lights, creating pools of harsh brightness separated by absolute darkness. I stuck to the shadows, making my way toward the main lodge, while avoiding the patrolling counselors who moved with unusual synchronicity between buildings. Reaching the lodge's rear entrance, I found it locked but noticed a partially open window on the ground floor. I squeezed through, finding myself in what appeared to be a storage room filled with camping equipment and lake sampling devices. The hallways were dimly lit by emergency lighting, allowing me to navigate toward where I remembered the records room being located. Twice I had to duck into alcoves to avoid patrolling counselors, their footsteps unnaturally in rhythm with the distant drums that continued pulsing through the night. The records room door was locked, but adjacent to it was a smaller office left carelessly open. Inside, filing cabinets lined one wall, while a desk supported an ancient computer with a glowing green monochrome screen. I began searching drawers frantically, finding student files organized by year. My own was there, thicker than expected, containing not just my application but detailed, psychological evaluations I'd never undergone and medical information including blood type and neural plasticity, ratings. A separate section held files labeled previous cycles going back decades. Opening one from 1987, I found a class photo similar to one taken of our group on arrival day. Of the 32 students pictured, 23 had red marks through their faces. Notes indicated most had completed integration successfully, while others were listed as rejected by substrate or cognitively incompatible. My hands trembled as I opened more recent files. Each cycle showed higher success rates, with the most recent completed cycle in 2016, achieving nearly 90% integration. A leather-bound journal similar to Dr. Wells caught my attention. It contained handwritten entries dating back to the 1960s, many in what I recognized as Dr. Bennett's angular script, though he would have been too young to have written the earliest entries. One passage from 1962 stood out. Initial contact with the entity in Shadow Creek's depths has proven more profound than anticipated. Its consciousness spans dimensions beyond human comprehension, yet it seeks symbiosis with our neural systems. The whispering is its attempt at communication. The physical changes in subjects are merely our bodies adapting to its presence. What humanity might achieve with such integration. Our limited test group shows remarkable enhancements in cognitive function. Though emotional affect is significantly reduced, a small price for transcendence. Later entries documented refinements to the process. Sound frequencies between 12-14 Hz weaken the blood-brain barrier, allowing easier integration of lake-derived compounds. Subjects resistant to auditory preparation show significantly higher rejection rates and cognitive damage. Selection criteria now include psychological profiles favoring openness to experience and reduced skepticism. With growing horror, I realized what Shadow Creek Camp truly was: not an educational retreat but a carefully disguised processing center where children were being systematically exposed to and prepared for integration with whatever lived in the lake's depths. Noise in the hallway interrupted my reading. Footsteps approached, multiple sets moving in perfect unison. I gathered what documents I could, shoving them into my shirt, and looked desperately for an exit. The window was too small. The door opened to the hallway where voices now murmured. The only other option was an air vent near the ceiling, its grate secured by aging screws. Using a letter opener from the desk, I managed to loosen the grate just as the door handle turned. I pulled myself into the dusty confines of the ventilation system as the door opened below, revealing Dr. Bennett, Dr. Wells, and Howard entering the office. "The resistance is stronger in this one," Dr. Bennett was saying. "His neural pathways show unusual resilience to harmonic restructuring." "The entity is particularly interested in this subject," Dr. Wells replied, flipping through her journal. "His psychological profile indicates exceptional pattern recognition and adaptive thinking, qualities that would enhance the collective significantly." Howard's voice was flatter than ever. "He has escaped the cabin. Security teams are searching the grounds." From my cramped position in the ventilation shaft, I watched Dr. Bennett's face transform from controlled composure to cold fury. "Find him," he ordered Howard. "Use every available counselor. He cannot leave Shadow Creek with what he knows." "And if we recover him?" Dr. Wells asked, her clinical tone chilling. "Immediate full immersion," Dr. Bennett replied. "No more gradual preparation. The entity can sort through whatever remains of his consciousness afterward." I held my breath as Howard left to organize the search. Dr. Bennett and Dr. Wells remained, reviewing files I had disturbed. "He's been here," Dr. Wells observed, touching the drawer I'd left partially open. "He knows." Dr. Bennett moved to the ancient computer, typing rapidly. "Security footage shows no exit from the building. He's still inside." I began inching backward through the ventilation shaft, moving as silently as possible while clutching the stolen documents. The metal duct branched in several directions. I chose passages leading away from voices, eventually finding myself above what appeared to be the camp kitchen. A vent opening provided enough space to squeeze through. I dropped down behind industrial refrigerators, the kitchen mercifully empty at 3 a.m. Through windows, I could see flashlight beams sweeping the grounds as counselors conducted their search. The kitchen had a delivery entrance leading outside, but crossing open ground to the forest would expose me instantly. Instead, I noticed a dumbwaiter, a small service elevator used to transport food to the upper floors. It was my only option. I climbed inside, pulling the doors closed as voices approached the kitchen. The cramped space barely contained me as I pulled the rope, hoisting myself upward in terrifying silence. At the third floor, the restricted level, I eased the dumbwaiter door open and peered into a dimly lit corridor unlike anything else at Shadow Creek. Modern medical equipment lined the walls, and doors with observation windows revealed rooms containing what looked like isolation tanks, connected to complex machinery. Through one window, I saw Brendan floating in a tank of dark liquid, electrodes attached to his temples, his expression eerily peaceful despite tubes running into his veins. In adjacent rooms, other students, including all those who had fallen ill, were similarly suspended. At the corridor's end stood double doors marked, "Lake Access, Authorized Personnel Only." A thunderous pulse emanated from beyond them, syncopated with the distant drums still echoing outside. I had to find a way out, but curiosity and horror propelled me toward those doors. Stolen key cards from the records office allowed me to slip through, finding myself on a metal platform overlooking an underground extension of Shadow Creek Lake. The chamber was massive, clearly natural but expanded and reinforced with modern technology. Floodlights illuminated the water from above while sensors and equipment lined the walls. A series of platforms descended to the water's surface, where 7 counselors stood in formation, chanting in rhythm with the drums. But it was what lay beneath the surface that froze my blood. The water glowed with bioluminescence, illuminating a vast shape extending into unknowable depths. A living entity of impossible size, its tissue resembling both plant and animal characteristics. Tendrils rose from the depths, connecting to interface points where counselors stood with reverent postures. This was the source of the whispers, the entity they sought to integrate us with. Its consciousness reached through water, sound, and the very air to reshape human minds into compatible vessels. Dr. Bennett's voice behind me shattered my paralysis. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said quietly, making no move to restrain me. "We discovered it in 1962, though indigenous legends suggested its presence for centuries. A collective consciousness that has evolved in isolation for millions of years, capable of interfacing with human neural systems. You're feeding children to it," I said, backing away. He smiled thinly. "Not feeding, elevating. Those who successfully integrate gain access to knowledge and abilities beyond human limitation. The sacrifice of individuality is minor compared to what's gained. And those who don't successfully integrate," his expression hardened, "unfortunate but necessary casualties in humanity's evolution. The entity must sample many to find ideal matches." As we spoke, I noticed Howard and other counselors silently surrounding us on the platform. Their movements were synchronized, their expressions identical, as though controlled by a single mind. "You've already joined with it," I realized aloud. "Partially," Dr. Bennett acknowledged. "Full integration requires younger, more adaptable nervous systems. Mine allows only limited connection, enough to serve as intermediary. These counselors represent later stages, college students from previous cycles returning to help prepare the next generation. I won't be part of this." "You have no choice," he replied. "Your exceptional mental resistance makes you particularly valuable. The entity has specifically requested your consciousness pattern." At his signal, Howard and the others moved forward to seize me. I backed against the railing, the dark water churning below as tendrils rose in apparent anticipation. "Don't fight it, James," Dr. Bennett urged. "Those who resist experience discomfort during the process. Those who embrace transcendence find peace." In that moment, facing capture and forced integration, I made the only choice available. I vaulted over the railing, plunging toward the glowing water below. I expected death upon impact, or worse, immediate possession by the entity. Instead, I experienced a curious slowing of perception as I neared the surface. The water parted before I touched it, creating a bubble of air that engulfed me and pulled me downward into darkness. Consciousness fragmented as pressure increased. Images flooded my mind, not my own memories, but thousands of others. Children from decades past, their experiences at Shadow Creek, their transformations, counselors returning year after year. Their humanity gradually eroded as the entity's influence grew stronger. And deeper still, the entity's own memories, ancient beyond comprehension, lonely beyond endurance. It had been trapped in the lake for millennia, its vast consciousness confined to dark waters, reaching out through whatever means it could devise to connect with the surface world. I understood then that Dr. Bennett had misinterpreted its nature. The entity didn't seek to consume or control, but to understand through connection. Its methods were invasive because it had no concept of human autonomy, only an overwhelming desire to end its isolation. This realization came as pressure squeezed my lungs and darkness claimed my vision. My last thought was that I would become another statistic in Shadow Creek's files, another red mark through a photograph. I awoke coughing water from my lungs on the lakeshore, the normal lake under open sky, not the underground chamber. Dawn light filtered through the trees, revealing my soaked clothes and the stolen documents still clutched in my hand, now water damaged but legible. How I had escaped the entity's grasp remained unclear. Perhaps it had rejected me, or perhaps, having glimpsed its true nature, it had released me to serve some other purpose. Getting to my feet required monumental effort. My body felt alien, as though muscle memory had been partially overwritten. Strange thoughts and images flickered at the edges of consciousness. Fragments of other lives, other experiences not my own. The camp appeared normal from a distance. Students gathering for breakfast, counselors directing morning activities. No one seemed to be searching for me. It was as though my escape had been forgotten or deliberately ignored. Taking advantage of this inexplicable reprieve, I made my way through the forest, circumventing the camp's perimeter. The documentation I'd stolen contained not just Shadow Creek secrets, but maps of the surrounding area, including ranger stations and hiking trails. The nearest ranger station was 8 miles away, A formidable journey through wilderness, but my only chance. Strange energies coursed through me, remnants of my encounter with the entity, providing strength beyond normal endurance. Hours passed as I navigated densely wooded slopes, constantly glancing back for pursuers. None came. Instead, I became aware of whispers following me, not threatening but almost protective, guiding me away from dangerous terrain and toward easier paths. By mid-afternoon, I reached the ranger station, a small outpost on the forest boundary. The ranger on duty, a middle-aged woman named Jenkins, looked up in surprise as I stumbled through the door, soaked, exhausted, and clutching waterlogged papers. "Kid, what happened to you?" she asked, immediately providing a blanket and radioing for medical assistance. I tried explaining about Shadow Creek, the entity, the student integrations, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. Ranger Jenkins listened patiently before making a call to her supervisor. "We've got another one," she said, covering the mouthpiece briefly. "From that camp." "Another one?" Hope surged within me. "There have been others who escaped?" Jenkins nodded grimly. "2 last year. 1 in 2016. Authorities investigated but found nothing concrete. Just a well-run camp with excellent safety records and documentation. Dr. Bennett is connected to powerful people. But the evidence," I protested, indicating the soggy papers. "The records will be taken seriously this time," she assured me. "Things are different now. Those other kids didn't have physical evidence and they weren't as coherent as you." Within hours, state police arrived, followed by federal agents who treated the documents with surprising seriousness. My parents were contacted and medical personnel examined me, finding anomalies in my brain activity and blood chemistry that corroborated aspects of my story. A massive operation descended on Shadow Creek Camp that evening, but found it completely abandoned. Students, counselors, Dr. Bennett, Dr. Wells, all gone without trace. Equipment remained, buildings stood empty, but every person had vanished along with all records and computer systems. Only the lake remained, dark and still beneath investigation spotlights. When authorities attempted to take deep water samples, their equipment malfunctioned inexplicably. Divers reported disorientation and refused to attempt second descents. Ground-penetrating radar revealed tunnel systems beneath the camp leading to underwater caverns, but these proved inaccessible due to collapsed passages and flooding. In the aftermath, official reports cited an environmental contamination incident at Shadow Creek, leading to emergency evacuation. The camp was permanently closed, the lake cordoned off as a restricted research site. Families of missing students received substantial settlements accompanied by non-disclosure agreements, effectively silencing further investigation. I underwent months of medical observation and psychological evaluation. The strange energies that had sustained my escape gradually faded, but other effects lingered. Occasional whispers at the edge of hearing, dreams filled with memories not my own, and an inexplicable ability to sense water sources even when hidden underground. My stolen documentation became the foundation for a classified government investigation, though I suspected key elements were being deliberately suppressed. Occasional news reports mentioned similar incidents at remote lakes across the country, stories quickly retracted or discredited. A year after my escape, I received an unmarked envelope containing a single photograph, a group of familiar faces, including Brendan, Victor, and other Shadow Creek students, standing before what appeared to be a research facility beside an Arctic lake. Their expressions were uniformly calm, their eyes reflecting the same empty compliance I'd witnessed in the counselors. In the background stood Dr. Bennett and Dr. Wells, alongside officials in military uniforms. A notation on the reverse read simply, "Phase 2 initiated. Integration proceeds as planned." Sometimes at night I still hear the whispers, not threatening but mournful, as though the entity regrets what it has become part of. I sense its presence spreading through waterways, reaching tendrils of influence into population centers through reservoir systems and treatment plants. The documents I salvaged suggested Shadow Creek was merely one of several such operations, a testing ground for techniques now being implemented on larger scales. What began as a scientist's obsession with an ancient entity has evolved into something far more systematic and far-reaching. I've tried warning others, only to find my credibility questioned. My medical history used to discredit my claims. The authorities who initially believed me now avoid my calls. My parents watch me with concerned expressions, whispering about medication adjustments when they think I can't hear. But I know what lurks in the dark waters of Shadow Creek and beyond. I know because part of it remains within me, a connection I neither sought nor can fully sever. Through this unwanted bond, I sense its growth, its spreading influence, and the approaching day when whispers will penetrate dreams worldwide. Until then, I document everything, hiding copies in various locations. This account may seem like paranoid fantasy, but to those who recognize the signs, unexplained infrastructure projects around reservoirs, unusual water quality testing, sound research focusing on specific frequencies, consider it a warning. The Adirondack Mountains always held a special place in my heart. Something about the ancient peaks, weathered by millennia of wind and rain, called to me in ways I couldn't articulate. That's why when my friend Greg suggested a weekend backpacking trip in late August of 2019, I didn't hesitate to say yes. The southern Adirondacks were particularly beautiful that time of year. The summer heat had begun to break, giving way to cooler evenings that hinted at the coming fall. The forest stood lush and green, vibrant with life before the eventual autumn transformation. I heard they finally fixed that access road, Greg said as we packed our gear the night before. Covered the whole thing in gravel. Should make getting to the trailhead much easier. I nodded, double-checking my pack contents against a mental checklist. That'll be a welcome change. Remember last year when my car almost got stuck in that mud pit? We shared a laugh, but something about the upcoming trip felt different. A subtle unease had settled in my stomach that I couldn't quite shake. I dismissed it as pre-trip anxiety, the kind that always plagued me before venturing into the wilderness. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. We left early, hoping to reach our destination, a remote lean-to by Stillwater Lake with plenty of daylight to spare. The drive took us through winding mountain roads until we reached the newly graveled access path. Greg had been right. The road was in excellent condition compared to previous years. When we pulled into the small dirt parking area, my heart sank. 7 vehicles already occupied spaces, far more than usual for this relatively obscure trail. Busy day, Greg muttered, echoing my thoughts. Think the lean-to's taken? I shrugged, trying to appear more optimistic than I felt. Only one way to find out. If it is, we can always hike to the next one. We shouldered our packs and approached the trailhead. A wooden sign marked the beginning of our journey, its weathered face bearing the name Stillwater Trail, and a distance marker, 4.2 miles to the lake. Beside it stood a small metal box containing a trail register. Greg reached for the box. Should we sign in? Probably a good idea. I peered over his shoulder as he flipped through the pages. Most entries were day hikers, but 3 separate groups had checked overnight beside their names. All headed to Stillwater Lake. Doesn't look promising, I said, signing my name on the next available line. The trail started gently enough, winding through dense forest of towering pines and ancient hardwoods. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds called overhead, and occasionally, rustling in the underbrush betrayed the presence of small woodland creatures. Under different circumstances, I would have found the setting peaceful. But that persistent unease refused to dissipate. Each shadow seemed darker than it should be. Each unexpected sound made my heart rate spike. I found myself constantly scanning the trail ahead and behind us, though I couldn't have said what I was looking for. You okay? Greg asked after about 20 minutes of hiking. You seem tense. I forced a smile. Just thinking about work stuff. It was a lie, but I couldn't explain the inexplicable dread that had settled over me. That's when we spotted him. A solitary figure standing motionless in the middle of the trail ahead. The man didn't move as we approached, which only intensified my discomfort. He was middle-aged, perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered face that suggested years spent outdoors. His hiking attire struck me as oddly pristine, expensive gear that looked barely worn, as though he'd walked straight out of an outfitter's catalog. Despite his recreational clothing, Something about his posture suggested military training or similar discipline. His eyes, pale blue and unnervingly focused, tracked our approach with predatory intensity. "Afternoon," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. He nodded as if to pass by, then stopped. "You two just came from the lot?" The question seemed innocuous enough, but it immediately struck me as strange. This trail had only one entry point, the lot we'd just left. Where else could we have come from? "Yeah," Greg replied. The man's gaze intensified. "How many cars are in the parking lot?" Greg exchanged a quick glance with me before answering. 7 or 8, I think. I seized the opportunity to ask about our destination. "Is the lean-to at Stillwater occupied?" "Have you been that way?" The stranger's head tilted slightly. "Saw smoke coming from that direction. Heard voices." His response was clipped, almost mechanical. "Did you look at the sign-in book?" "No," Greg said. "We signed in but didn't really check who else was on the trail." The man's eyes widened unnaturally. "Oh, you two didn't sign in? You really should sign in so people know you were here." His voice took on a lecturing tone. "If you get disappeared or get hurt, they'll know where you were." He continued emphasizing the importance of the register, repeating phrases with slight variations as though reciting something memorized. Then, abruptly, "How many cars are in the parking lot?" Greg paused, clearly disturbed by the repetition. "Like we said, about 8. Something about this exchange triggered a defensive instinct in me. "Did you sign in?" I asked. The man's face transformed. His lips pulled back in what might generously be called a smile, though it contained no warmth. A short, harsh laugh escaped him. "Ha, nah, I never sign in." My skin crawled. The contradiction between his insistence on our registration and his admission lay bare in the forest air between us. "Well, we should get going," I said, stepping around him. Losing daylight. As we passed, I felt his gaze on our backs. Neither of us spoke until we were well out of earshot. "That was weird, right?" Greg whispered. "I'm not just imagining things." "Definitely weird," I confirmed. Why was he so fixated on how many cars were in the lot? And that thing about getting disappeared, who says that? We spent the next mile dissecting the encounter, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was socially awkward. Maybe he had some cognitive issue that made him repeat questions. Maybe he was simply concerned about trail safety. None of these explanations satisfied the alarm bells ringing in my mind. The forest grew denser as we continued, the trail narrowing in places where vegetation encroached from both sides. Shadows lengthened as afternoon progressed toward evening. The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied our early hike gradually faded, replaced by an unsettling silence broken only by our footfalls and the occasional distant rustle. "We should pick up the pace," Greg suggested, checking his watch. "It'll be dark in a couple hours." I nodded, but something made me turn and look back down the trail. For a split second, I thought I glimpsed a figure standing motionless between 2 distant trees, just watching us. When I blinked, there was nothing there. "What is it?" Greg asked. "Nothing," I said, unable to shake the feeling we were being followed. "Let's just hurry." The trail wound through a particularly dense section of forest before opening suddenly to reveal Stillwater Lake, a pristine body of water nestled among the mountains like a mirror dropped from the sky. In normal circumstances, I would have paused to appreciate the view, but my attention was immediately drawn to a thin column of smoke rising from the shoreline. The lean-to was indeed occupied. The lean-to sat about 30 yards from the water's edge, a simple 3-sided wooden structure with an overhanging roof, designed to provide basic shelter for hikers. As we approached, I called out, not wanting to startle whoever was already there. "Hello? Anyone home?" A man looked up from the small fire he was tending. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, solidly built, with a closely cropped beard and watchful eyes. Inside the lean-to, a woman of similar age was organizing gear. She straightened at our arrival, her posture immediately defensive. "Hey," the man replied, his voice neither welcoming nor hostile. "You guys hiking through?" "We were hoping to stay at the lean-to," I admitted. "But looks like you beat us to it." The couple exchanged a quick glance. "I'm Wes," the man finally said. "This is Jasmine." We introduced ourselves and dropped our packs, grateful for the chance to rest while deciding our next move. The lean-to was clearly full. Their gear spread across the wooden platform left little room for additional occupants. Feel free to take a break and figure out your plans, Wes offered. His tone was friendly enough, but his eyes remained guarded, constantly scanning between us and the surrounding forest. Thanks, Greg replied. We're debating whether to hike to the next lean-to or head back out. Next one's almost 4 miles, Jasmine said, emerging from the shelter. She wore hiking pants and a faded flannel shirt. Her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. You'd be setting up in the dark. She wasn't wrong. The sun had already begun its descent behind the western ridge, painting the lake in amber hues. By the time we reached the next shelter, we'd be fumbling with headlamps to collect firewood and prepare dinner. As we rested and snacked, the conversation flowed in fits and starts. Wes and Jasmine answered our questions about their hike, but volunteered little additional information. Their responses seemed rehearsed, as though they'd prepared for an interrogation rather than casual conversation. You run into anyone else on the trail? I asked, thinking of the strange man. Another loaded glance between them. Just a few day hikers heading back, Wes said. Why? I described our encounter with the peculiar man who'd asked about the cars. As I spoke, I noticed Jasmine's knuckles whitening around the water bottle she held. Did he have a walking stick? She asked. With a carved eagle head? I nodded, surprised by the specific detail I'd forgotten to mention. Wes and Jasmine exchanged their most significant look yet. A silent communication passed between them that excluded Greg and me entirely. We should get more firewood before it gets dark, Wes announced abruptly. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, if you guys want to stay here tonight, we can share the lean-to. It'll be tight, but better than hiking out in the dark. The offer caught me off guard. Their previous body language hadn't suggested such hospitality. Nevertheless, the alternative, stumbling through the forest at night or trying to set up camp without proper preparation, seemed far less appealing. That's really kind of you, Greg said. We'd appreciate it. We can help gather firewood, I offered. Jasmine nodded stiffly. That would be helpful. The 4 of us spread out to collect fallen branches, though I noticed Wes never let Jasmine get too far from his sight. They moved with a synchronicity that spoke of long practice or shared fear. I couldn't tell which. As the daylight faded, the forest transformed. Familiar shapes became ambiguous, shadows deepened, and distant sounds carried with unnerving clarity. Working together, we assembled a substantial pile of wood beside the fire pit. When we returned to the lean-to, Jasmine turned to face us directly. Just so you two know, she said without preamble, I have a handgun on me. The statement hung in the air, neither a threat nor a reassurance. For bears? Greg asked awkwardly. Among other things, she replied. Trying to diffuse the tension, I mentioned my own interest in firearms and asked to see it. Jasmine drew a compact 9mm pistol from a concealed holster and showed it to me briefly. What unnerved me wasn't the weapon itself, but what happened next. She didn't put it away. Instead, she rested it casually on her lap as she began preparing their dinner. The night hadn't even truly begun, and already I was questioning the wisdom of staying. Dinner proceeded with strained conversation. Wes and Jasmine ate quickly, efficiently, speaking little. The pistol remained in Jasmine's possession, sometimes in her hand, sometimes on her lap, never more than inches from her fingers. I tried not to stare at it, but my eyes kept returning to the weapon as darkness settled completely around us. After we'd finished our own meal, Wes produced a bottle of whiskey from his pack. Anyone interested? He asked, unscrewing the cap. The alcohol seemed a potential bridge across the chasm of awkwardness that had formed between our two parties. Greg and I accepted, hopeful that a drink might relax the strange tension. As the bottle made its rounds, our conversation gradually became more natural. Wes explained they were from Albany, regular hikers who tried to get into the mountains at least once a month. They asked about our backgrounds, our hiking experience, our knowledge of the Adirondacks. Normal campfire talk, finally, except for the gun. Jasmine continued to handle it with alarming casualness as the whiskey diminished in the bottle. She gestured with it while talking, let it dangle loosely between her fingers, rested it against her thigh as she drank. My attention split between maintaining conversation and monitoring her increasingly careless handling of the loaded firearm. Have you hiked the High Peaks region? Wes asked, passing the bottle back to me. A few times, I replied, taking a measured sip. Marcy, Algonquin, some of the others. Beautiful up there, he nodded. Different from here, though. More people. Sometimes too many. Is that why you chose this trail? Greg asked. For the solitude? Another significant glance between our hosts. Something like that, Jasmine said. The fire cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting eyes that never quite settled on any one spot for long. She continually scanned the darkness beyond our small circle of light, the gun now resting casually in her palm. Been out here before? I asked, trying to keep the conversation flowing. No, Wes answered, perhaps too quickly. First time on this particular trail. Jasmine shifted, her expression suddenly intense. Did you hear that? We all fell silent, straining to detect whatever had caught her attention. The forest at night is never truly quiet. Small creatures rustling, branches creaking, leaves whispering in the breeze. But beyond these expected sounds, I heard nothing unusual. What did you hear? Greg whispered. Instead of answering, Jasmine raised a finger to her lips, then pointed into the darkness beyond the firelight. We listened for nearly a full minute, the tension building with each passing second. Just as I was about to speak, a tremendous splash erupted from the lake, a sound like someone had thrown a large rock or jumped from a considerable height into the water. We all startled, instinctively moving closer to the fire. What the hell was that? Greg hissed. Before anyone could offer theories, another splash sounded from the opposite direction, equally loud, equally startling. Frogs? I suggested, trying to rationalize. Maybe beavers? Jasmine's laugh was sharp and humorless. That's no frog. Deer coming to drink? Wes offered, but his tone betrayed his disbelief in his own explanation. A third splash, closer this time. Jasmine stood up abruptly, the pistol now gripped properly in both hands. Sasquatch, she declared, her eyes wild in the firelight. Greg and I exchanged glances, uncertain if she was joking. But Jasmine's face remained intensely serious as she launched into an elaborate explanation about local Bigfoot activity, how they communicated by throwing rocks into water, how they stalked hikers, how they were known to abduct people who ventured too far from safety. As her monologue grew increasingly frantic, I noticed Wes watching her with an expression that wasn't surprise or embarrassment. It was fear. Another splash, louder than the previous ones. Without warning, Jasmine raised her pistol and fired repeatedly into the darkness, the gunshots shattering the night with devastating volume. Jesus! Greg shouted, scrambling backward. My ears rang painfully from the concussive blasts. I couldn't believe what had just happened. This woman, half drunk, had emptied her magazine into pitch blackness without any identifiable target. Jasmine. Wes grabbed her arm as she lowered the weapon. What the hell? She turned to him, eyes blazing. They were getting closer. You heard them. The aftermath of the gunshots hung in the air, a mixture of acrid powder and stunned silence. No one knew what to say. No one knew what to do. We were miles from civilization with a woman who had just demonstrated a terrifying lack of judgment, and we still had the entire night ahead of us. The lean-to suddenly felt impossibly small. 4 adults, each with their individual gear, crammed into a space designed for perhaps 3 people at most. I positioned myself as far from Jasmine as possible, which wasn't far at all, maybe 6 feet separated us. She reloaded her pistol before settling down for the night, the metallic click of the magazine locking into place making my stomach turn. The weapon remained beside her left hand as she laid her sleeping bag out, creating a physical boundary between herself and the rest of us. No one spoke much after the shooting incident. What could we say? Confronting her seemed dangerous. Ignoring what had happened seemed impossible. Greg caught my eye as we arranged our sleeping bags, a clear message passing between us. We're leaving at first light. Sleep came in fragmented bursts, each awakening accompanied by a fresh surge of anxiety. Every time I opened my eyes, I found myself checking to make sure Jasmine's hands weren't moving toward that pistol. The darkness felt oppressive, charged with potential violence. Around what must have been midnight, I awoke to hushed voices. Wes and Jasmine were talking in fervent whispers. I kept my breathing even, pretending to sleep while straining to catch their words. Followed us here, Jasmine was saying. I know it. You don't know anything, Wes replied, his voice tense but measured. The medication. Don't start with that again. Her tone hardened. I know what I saw. Same man as before. Same pattern. We're safe here, Wes insisted. Just try to sleep. Their conversation died away, leaving me with more questions than answers. What medication? Who did they think followed them? The strange man we'd encountered on the trail? Sleep eluded me after that, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. The night air grew increasingly cold, but I barely noticed, too consumed by the growing certainty that we had stumbled into something dangerous and complex. Around 3 a.m., a new sound penetrated the darkness. Footsteps, not the random movements of forest creatures, but deliberate, bipedal steps circling our campsite, soft but unmistakable. I wasn't the only one who heard them. Jasmine sat bolt upright, the pistol already in her hand. Wes placed a restraining hand on her arm, shaking his head in silent warning. They remained frozen that way, listening as the footsteps completed a circuit around our shelter, then gradually faded into the distance. My heart hammered so loudly I wondered if the others could hear it. Greg was awake too, his eyes reflecting the dying embers of our fire. No one spoke. No one moved. We simply waited in shared terror until the forest reclaimed its normal nocturnal sounds. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The first gray light of morning brought little relief. Jasmine and Wes were already packing when I opened my eyes, moving with the efficiency of people accustomed to quick departures. The pistol had disappeared, presumably back into its holster, but Jasmine's movements remained tense, hypervigilant. You heard it too, she said when she noticed me watching her. Not a question, but a statement. I nodded slowly. Someone was walking around the camp. Wes shot her a warning glance that she ignored. Not someone, she said, lowering her voice. Something. Before I could respond, Greg stirred beside me, grumbling about the early hour. The moment for confidences passed, and Jasmine returned to her packing with renewed intensity. Within 20 minutes, they were ready to depart. Wes paused before leaving, regarding us with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Be careful on your way out, he said. Maybe wait until full daylight before heading back. Why? Greg asked. Something we should know about? Wes hesitated, clearly weighing his words. Just pay attention to your surroundings. And if you see that man again, the one with the walking stick, don't talk to him. Just keep moving. With that cryptic warning, they departed, following the trail that led deeper into the wilderness, rather than back toward the parking lot. We watched until they disappeared among the trees. What the hell was that all about? Greg asked once they were gone. I shook my head. I don't know, but I overheard them talking last night. Jasmine said something about being followed, and Wes mentioned medication. Great, Greg muttered. So we spent the night with an armed paranoid schizophrenic. Maybe, I conceded. But what about those footsteps? We both heard those. Greg had no answer for that. We began preparing our own breakfast in silence, both lost in thought. The morning was beautiful. Mist rising from the lake's surface, birds beginning their day with cheerful calls, sunlight gradually strengthening through the trees. It should have been peaceful, but the residual tension from the night before prevented any real sense of tranquility. As I was filtering water from the lake, I noticed something partially buried in the mud near the shoreline, a small notebook with a waterproof cover. Curious, I retrieved it, wiping away the dirt. Inside, I found page after page of meticulous handwriting. Dates, times, locations, descriptions of encounters and evidence, crude maps with X marks and circles. It appeared to be Jasmine's journal, presumably dropped during the confusion of the previous night. Greg, I called. You need to see this. We pored over the journal together, trying to make sense of the fragmented entries. Most recently, Jasmine had documented multiple sightings in the southern Adirondacks, incidents she attributed to Sasquatch activity. But interspersed with these fantastical accounts were more disturbing entries about a watcher who had been following them for months. The watcher has infiltrated the ranger service, one entry read. He wears their clothes, uses their equipment, but his eyes are wrong. When he thinks no one can see, he moves differently. Inhuman. This is seriously messed up, Greg whispered. Turning another page. The final entry, dated the previous day, sent ice through my veins. He's here. Saw him on the trail asking questions, counting cars, counting people, preparing. Wes doesn't believe me, but I know. Tonight it ends, one way or another. I closed the journal, my hands shaking slightly. We need to leave now. Greg didn't argue. We packed our gear with unprecedented speed, leaving the lean-to as we'd found it. The journal I tucked into my pack, unsure what to do with it, but certain it shouldn't be left behind. As we set off down the trail leading back to the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that yesterday's unease had transformed into today's legitimate fear. The forest felt different in the morning light, less mysterious but somehow more sinister in its clarity. Every movement caught my peripheral vision. Every snapped twig made me flinch. Greg wasn't faring much better, repeatedly checking over his shoulder as we hurried along the trail. "What do you think happened to them?" he asked after we'd been walking for about 20 minutes. "Who?" "The couple before us," Greg clarified. "The ones who signed the register as heading to Stillwater. Wes and Jasmine were acting like they were the first ones there, but there were definitely others signed in." I hadn't considered this. Maybe they changed their minds and went somewhere else. Maybe, Greg conceded, but his tone suggested he was entertaining darker possibilities. We fell into silence again, maintaining a brisk pace that bordered on jogging. The trail seemed longer on the return journey, each familiar landmark taking too long to appear. When we reached a distinctive split boulder that I remembered from the outward hike, I realized we were still only halfway back to the parking lot. "Let's take a quick water break," I suggested. "Just 2 minutes." Greg nodded gratefully, dropping his pack beside mine. We sat on the boulder, drinking from our water bottles and saying little. The forest around us had gone quiet. No birdsong, no rustling from small animals. "Just stillness, do you hear that?" Greg whispered. "I don't hear anything," I replied, which was precisely the problem. "Exactly." His eyes scanned the surrounding trees. Everything silent. I was about to suggest we keep moving when a new sound broke the unnatural quiet. A low, rhythmic thumping. Not footsteps, not animal movement. Something else. "What is that?" I hissed. The sound grew louder, a measured mechanical beating that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then alarmingly, we heard voices. Multiple voices calling back and forth in the distance. "And hello?" Greg shouted. "Who's there?" "Shut up," I grabbed his arm. "What if it's him?" "Who? The weird guy from yesterday? Or Jasmine's imaginary Bigfoot?" Despite his sarcastic tone, fear edged his words. The thumping grew louder still, and suddenly I placed the sound. Helicopter rotors. A moment later, the aircraft itself appeared, hovering above the tree line about half a mile ahead in the direction of the parking lot. "Search and rescue?" Greg suggested. I didn't answer, already shouldering my pack. Whatever was happening, I wanted to reach civilization as quickly as possible. We moved faster now, driven by curiosity and lingering fear. As we drew closer to the trailhead, we began encountering other people. Official-looking individuals in various uniforms. Park rangers. State police. Even what appeared to be FBI agents, judging by their distinctive jackets. One ranger spotted us approaching and immediately altered his path to intercept. "Are you coming from Stillwater Lake?" he asked without preamble. We nodded, exchanging worried glances. "Did you encounter anyone else on the trail?" His tone was professional but urgent. "A couple at the lean-to," Greg replied. "Wes and Jasmine. And a strange man on the trail yesterday." The ranger's posture changed subtly. "Can you describe this man?" I provided as detailed a description as I could, including the carved eagle walking stick that had seemed to mean something to Jasmine. As I spoke, the ranger's expression grew increasingly grim. "When did you last see the couple?" he asked. "This morning," I said. "They packed up early and continued on the trail, away from the parking lot." The ranger spoke rapidly into his radio, relaying this information to someone else. Then he turned back to us. "I need you both to come with me. There are some people who will want to speak with you." "What's going on?" Greg demanded. "Are we in trouble?" "No," the ranger assured us. "But you may have been the last people to see Wes and Jasmine alive." The command post had been established at the parking lot, multiple vehicles and a mobile operations unit creating an improvised headquarters. We were separated almost immediately. Each led to different areas for questioning. My interviewer was a serious-faced woman who identified herself as Special Agent Winters. Start from the beginning, she instructed, setting a recorder on the table between us. When did you arrive at the trail? I recounted everything. Our arrival, the encounter with the strange man meeting Wes and Jasmine, the gunshots in the night, the footsteps around the lean-to, their hasty departure in the morning. I hesitated only when it came to the journal I'd found. There's something else, I finally admitted, removing it from my pack. I found this by the lake this morning. I think it belonged to Jasmine. Agent Winters took the notebook carefully, her expression revealing nothing as she flipped through the pages. When she finished, she closed it and regarded me with new intensity. Do you believe in coincidences, Mr. My Name? The question caught me off guard. Sometimes, I guess. Depends on the coincidence. She nodded as if I'd confirmed something. What would you say if I told you that Wesley Kincaid and Jasmine Briggs disappeared 3 weeks ago after reporting a stalker to police in Albany? My mouth went dry. That's impossible. They were with us last night. And yet, she continued, we have their vehicle, abandoned at this very parking lot for the past 21 days. We have a trail register where someone signed their names, in handwriting that doesn't match either of their known signatures. And now we have this journal which appears to have been written by someone experiencing a severe psychotic break. I struggled to process her words. Are you saying the people we met weren't Wes and Jasmine? Agent Winters leaned forward. I'm saying that the real Wes and Jasmine came hiking 3 weeks ago and never returned home. I'm saying that approximately 2 weeks ago, another couple disappeared from a different trailhead 50 miles north of here, and 3 days ago, a solo hiker vanished from a trail 20 miles east. The man on the trail, I whispered, the pieces falling into horrible alignment. The one asking about cars in the parking lot. She nodded grimly. He's counting, tracking how many people enter the wilderness and how many leave, making sure the numbers match even when the faces don't. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized how close we might have come to becoming part of this terrible pattern. The footsteps around our camp last night. It was him, wasn't it? Most likely, Agent Winters confirmed. We believe he stalks potential victims before deciding whether to act. Your large group, 4 people together, may have deterred him. But the couple we met, I insisted, still struggling with the implications. If they weren't Wes and Jasmine, who were they? Agent Winters' expression darkened. That's what we're trying to determine. There are 2 possibilities. Either they were innocent hikers who encountered the same individual you did and developed paranoid delusions as a result of that trauma. Or they were working with him. The helicopter returned, its rotors drowning out further conversation temporarily. When the noise receded, Agent Winters continued. The weapon Jasmine carried, did you get a good look at it? I described it as best I could, though firearms weren't my area of expertise. Serial numbers? I shook my head. I didn't notice. She made a note. We believe our suspect has been active in these mountains for at least 3 years. Possibly much longer. The pattern is always the same. He studies his victims, learns their habits, sometimes assumes their identities after they're gone. The helicopter you saw was searching for remains near Stillwater Lake. She paused, her professionalism momentarily cracking. We found some. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by horror. The real Wes and Jasmine? We won't know until forensics completes their work, she replied. But yes, that's our assumption. After several more hours of questioning, Greg and I were finally released with warnings to remain available for additional interviews. As we prepared to leave, a commotion near the trailhead drew our attention. A search team was emerging from the forest, surrounding a handcuffed figure. Even at a distance, I recognized him, the same man from the trail, still wearing those pristine hiking clothes, still carrying that eagle-headed walking stick. His face showed no emotion as they led him toward a waiting police vehicle. Our eyes met briefly across the parking lot. His expression remained blank, but something flickered in his pale gaze. Recognition, perhaps. Or evaluation, as if he were still counting, still calculating, still determining who would enter the forest and who would leave it. I haven't returned to the Adirondacks since that day. My hiking equipment gathers dust in a closet, unlikely to ever see use again. Sometimes at night I still hear those measured footsteps circling in the darkness, and I wonder about the couple who called themselves Wes and Jasmine, who they really were, what they knew, whether they survived. But mostly, I think about how wilderness conceals more than beauty, how isolation renders us vulnerable, how easily a person can vanish between one trail marker and the next, leaving nothing behind but an entry in a register that says they were there, and then, suddenly weren't. The Adirondacks keep their secrets, and some of those secrets have footsteps.